There are no true auteurs. They all have collaborators that are critical to their work. And you can go throughout film history and look at all the great auteurs, and there's usually a producer or a writer or an actor or an editor or a composer that is critical to their voice.
Welcome to the Slamdance First Film Podcast. I'm Michael Gallagher.
And I'm Jana Gallagher.
And we are here to guide you through the making of your first feature film.
There's so many different ways in to make your first film that we were really interested in talking to people who have done it and demystify it for you.
Today on the show, we are speaking with Joe and Anthony Russo. The brothers premiered their debut feature film Pieces at the 1997 Slamdance Film Festival. The Russo brothers have gone on to make some of the most popular and highest grossing films of all time, and really supportive of all things Slamdance. It's a great interview about their humble beginnings. So sit back, relax, and enjoy our conversation with Joe and Anthony Russo.
Hi, my name is Joe Russo.
And my name is Anthony Russo, and our first film was Pieces.
Just so we have some context real quick, you want to talk a little bit about the podcast and what you guys usually discuss and what we can be helpful discussing.
The goal is to empower filmmakers to make their film. That's kind of the overarching of why we're doing this podcast, and to unpack people's process to demystify it.
No, that's great. We love that. One of our missions as well, demystification. It's a very noble cause, and I think as the world progresses, things seem to get more contained rather than less contained, and filmmaking in particular is a very difficult field to crack into, especially as a young filmmaker. It can feel almost impossible. So anything that demystifies or tries to make accessible or gives people opportunity is a big win for us too. So
Awesome.
Talk about the premise of the film for anyone who hasn't seen it, because I don't think it's commercially available. So maybe just give us a little idea of what the movie is about and what your intention was with it.
So the movie is about sort of a trio of criminally minded brothers who work in this salon, and they are getting killed by their competitor. And so they come up with this plan to sort of steal the client list from their main rival.
totally, we were always attracted to comically inept characters who were equal parts absurd and dangerous, because it seemed a lot like Cleveland and a lot like the people we knew growing up, that there was this town that we grew up in that had seen a higher unemployment rate in the 70s and the Great Depression. The river had caught on fire at one point, famously. It was so polluted that the top of the river was burning, and there's sort of a ridiculous photo of firemen trying to put out the fire in a river. And the mayor's hair caught on fire, and there was a style of dress referred to as full Cleveland, which meant you were dressed in shitty polyester clothes. We were made fun of every night on talk shows. Johnny Carson, it was a favorite of his, was to pick on Cleveland. So we came from this place that was equal parts absurd and dangerous. And I think that really informed our first movie. And as Ant said, our head was swimming in all kinds of concepts at the time because we were students, and they those crazy concepts found their way into the film.
What inspired you to make Pieces?
Steven Soderbergh is also a big supporter of Slamdance and made a film called Sex, Lies, and Videotape. It was either 88 or 89. And when it premiered at Sundance, before his affiliation with Slamdance, the movie exploded. And regional filmmakers all over the country got very excited because suddenly there was a young filmmaker who was not from Hollywood who made a movie in his voice, in a very distinctive voice that catapulted him into the ranks of the major filmmakers. It got famously bought, and then he also got catapulted into the realm of major filmmakers. So off of that inspiration, Anthony and I decided to write a script together. It was a riotous script. It was non-linear in structure, very experimental. And this was, I think, probably started writing this in like the summer of 93.
When you conceived of this film, was it something where you just said, look at these guys outside of Hollywood, they're getting into festivals, we could do that because we're outside of the system, so maybe we could have some exciting new voice? What was the spark that said, hey, let's just sit down and start writing something and let's then make it?
Yeah, what gave you the confidence to actually do it?
I mean, it is very much what you're describing, because we really felt like we were exactly 1 million miles from Hollywood. Filmmaking, we didn't grow up around people in the arts. It was just a foreign idea to us. And certainly filmmaking, which seems so technical. Our first step to writing a screenplay was reading about how to write a screenplay. We just went to the library, went to the bookstore, started devouring every book we could find, spent several months just doing that. It was very much like a self-taught process for us, but it was also very methodical. We were studying our favorite films. We were breaking down our favorite films. We were looking at them structurally. We were reading books. We're breaking down the art form structurally and on a craft level.
We should mention it's more difficult at that time because the equipment was more specialized and harder to come by and expensive. It wasn't like you could go on Amazon and order a recorder and a microphone, and we had to find, really specialized craftspeople to help us make the movie because we knew nothing about how to make a movie. It was a journey for us, but it was compressed over that year while we were writing the script, seeking out collaborators, trying to raise money, applying for credit cards, trying to get the biggest limit that we could on the credit cards, and ran into it, I think, without being fully funded. And then ultimately, once we shot the film, the negative sat in a refrigerator for 6 months, maybe a year even, before we could develop it because we didn't have the money to develop it. So we had to go back to work to figure out how to develop it.
And I'm curious, I feel like with a lot of filmmakers making their first film, I see them going back to their hometown or using the elements that they get for free to, make it stand out and utilize those resources. Did you guys call upon your family and friends and team, or what were kind of the elements that you used to make the film what it is?
Everybody was involved. Our entire family was involved. Our mother and our sister were making pasta every day. We shot nights, like 35 nights in a row. Our uncle had a hair replacement clinic, and we thought it was a hilarious location for a trio of brothers who were ne'er-do-wells. So we set the story in that clinic, and we used his clinic and shot there at nights. When they would leave at 6 at night, we'd come in with the crew, and then we'd have to be out by 8 a.m. the next morning. We used his shop. Our friends and family were helping us move the equipment around. All the actors were friends of ours. One was a friend of mine from a Case Western from the MFA program. Another was a friend that I had acted with in a production of American Buffalo in the UK, who flew over and lived with us for the time that we were shooting the movie. So it was a huge community effort, and everyone was involved, and it would have worked without the help of our small community, especially when we went to Slamdance and brought 30 people, bought tickets and came with us, who all worked on the film because they felt emotional ownership, and we plastered the town and packed the theater. It was 2/3 empty by the time the film was over, but we packed it to start it.
Really? Your family and friends left?
They weren't in it, but it was anybody who'd come to check out the film for commercial intentions was sorely disappointed. One of the people still sitting in that theater at the end of it was Soderbergh.
I feel like cynical, dark comedy, that's been a thread throughout your work. Where do you think that comes from?
I think it's all of it. Like Joe was describing, Cleveland has a very underdog mentality. It's very kind of have punk rock attitude. Our family, it's an Italian immigrant family from our grandparents' generation. There is definitely this attitude of not belonging and sort of trying to fight your way into the mainstream.
Our father was a radical politician. When he was in his early 20s, he was the youngest person voted into the Cleveland City Council, was sort of an extreme left candidate. Our mother is a very quiet, thoughtful person, and our dad is very fiery. And so at times I think we present very quiet and thoughtful, but there's an intense amount of fuckery in everything that we do. I think just amuses some base instincts inside of us, whether it be Arrested Development or Community, or even the work in Marvel where we're killing favorite characters. And there is a through line of sort of cynicism and let's get a hammer out and smash it and see what happens.
I always say a film is a mirror of a director. What gave you guys permission to be storytellers? There's so many professions in the world. You don't have any family in the arts. Where did that come from?
It's a great question. I don't think anyone's ever asked us that question.
Oh, good. That was my goal.
That's a great question because I think it's really informative to everyone's processes. It's like, how do you make that leap from your everyday life to something as fantastical as making stories and putting them on screen for people?
I heard a musician describe this. When you grow up in a place like the industrial Midwest, where you're not around anything having to do with the arts or the industry or anything like, there's nobody in the business. So you're able to just kind of dream because there's nothing, it's all sort of make-believe and fantasy. So I think early on, it was just very personal. It wasn't about, how does this become real? It was just about how do we do this?
We got lucky when it became real.
Can you remember best day on set where you felt like things are cooking, the vision's coming together, we nailed that shot? And then can you think where everything fell apart? Because I think that happens to filmmakers. You're on set, you have a plan, someone doesn't show up on time. We're losing light. Filmmakers sometimes get the miracle, and then sometimes they get the natural disaster. So I'm curious if you could remember a time from Pieces.
It's interesting because we have very odd shared taste. There's always moments where we're snickering on set at something that we absolutely love, and then cut it together and show it to people, and it's sort of like blank faces, like it happens quite often throughout our careers. So best moments are always around, I think, when we hit that tone, and then Pieces in particular, there were things that we just found wildly funny and ridiculous that we loved. There was a particular sequence where I play one of the lead characters and Anth plays a bad guy. And he shows up at a bar to come, beat me up. And we shot that in a day, but it involved me getting thrown over pool tables and smashed into pinball machines. I remember taking time, like there's 6 of us and no stunt training, and there's a lot of bumps and bruises and maybe some bloody lips by the end of the day, but it looked great on camera. I think that was probably a highlight for it. And then worst days, there's always scrambled, hairy day. I mean, we did this bank heist where, we're shooting without permits, and we had guns that had blanks in them going off and racing away before police would show up. And it was always a scramble. We didn't understand how to get permits. We didn't have the time to get them. I would recommend that you get permits.
Yeah, especially in this day and age, do not recommend using fake guns.
This is a different time. This is the Wild West. You kind of have to break the rules to learn, we shouldn't break those rules.
Yes, that's right. This was 30 years ago.
You were talking about credit cards and just big borrowing and stealing, using family, anyone who could just come and help make this film. Maybe just give us an idea of what it came in at, or how you were dealing with the credit card debt.
We were learning as we went, and we were continually running out of money. So it took us about 3 years to make the movie. We were starting, stopping. When we finished shooting it, it took us $35,000 to get there. We were so broke at that point, we just had to stick the film in a refrigerator, and just leave it there. We couldn't do anything. So after about 6 months, we borrowed our cousin's van, and we drove to New York City. And this was right around the time that Avids were just starting to replace flatbeds. And so we picked up a Steenbeck for like $300 and drove it back to Cleveland and put it in the apartment, and spent the next year figuring out how to cut film, just cutting film over and over again, bins and bins of film. And it was an amazing way to learn how to edit, And we were by ourselves. It was a strange, arduous process, but it was incredibly fun and thrilling. To get your answer, it took a lot more money after that. And we probably carried the debt from making that movie for 10 years. That's how long it took us to get out of debt from that. It's probably a couple $100,000.
So you get it in the can for 35, and then it's a few $100,000 for post and for credit card fees. Did you have jobs on the side?
We had jobs. We had credit cards that we were maxing out that we paid off 10 years later. We probably just went bankrupt if we didn't end up as working filmmakers. We had student loans that we were using.
That was one of the best hacks. Was after we were editing for that year, we were like, okay, well, now that we're getting a movie together, what do we do with it now? And so we thought, okay, we either move to LA or New York and get jobs in the business and figure out how you take a movie forward, or film school. And we knew at film school that they had, student loans and equipment and things. We thought, okay, maybe that will help us finish up the movie. So we ended up applying to film school in the mid-90s when the indie movie craze was going on. We weren't sure if we belonged in Hollywood or New York. And so we split up for film school. Joe went to UCLA. I went to Columbia in New York. During that last year, we kind of did the final touches on the movie, so to speak. But what we were also able to do that here, there was a limit on how much you can borrow as a student, as a grad student, especially. And the limits are sort of dictated. Again, I don't know if it's still like this. This is what it was like at the time. The limits were dictated by what your field of study was. And, if it was financing, you could borrow a lot more. And if it was something in the arts, you can borrow a lot less, et cetera. But there was a way around that where if you were spending on a project that was required to sort of complete your degree, it existed outside the normal limits of what you were allowed to borrow to go to school for tuition and living expenses. And you have to get the head of the department to sign the approval. So I submitted a letter one day to him through the secretary to ask for more money to finish what I called a student film, even though it wasn't a student film. And then the next day I picked it up and it was signed. Then a few months later, I submitted another letter for more money, picked it up, it was signed. It was literally like, it just kept getting approvals for more and more borrowing through this sort of strange workaround in the student loan debt limit. But it was a lot of things like that. Some family borrowing as well. And like Joe was saying, lots of credit card debt.
So I'm curious, you guys working together, like Michael and I, Michael's a director, I act and produce. We have a company together. And I feel like one of our strengths is that we have that trust, we have that community, we have, that shared understanding, that shared knowledge. We're also married. But I'm curious, I see that in you guys. And I think that from an outsider point of view, I feel like that's your superpower, that trust, that kind of shared understanding. But at what point did you realize that, or how would you say that that's helped you?
I think we're lucky because we're family, right? I think it's really important for young filmmakers to have partners. It's a really difficult job to tell a story. It requires a lot of work and effort. And if you can find someone that's like-minded, that can either be a producer or a writer or somebody in your life that contributes creatively where you're working and you're collaborating together, I think it's critical to success. And also, if you do become a working filmmaker, it's very hard. It's physically draining, it's emotionally draining, it's psychologically draining. And having those collaborators to prop you up and you can prop them up, it is invaluable. So that trust is essential. I think, when we see collaborations fail or movies fail, it's usually because there's a lack of trust amongst the creative group. If you start when you're younger and you work together over time, you build a shorthand and you can increase that trust because you have to go through that process of creating it, writing it, shooting it, and then editing it, and then being there together in the edit room going, oh, we got to a place where our shared sensibilities are, working together to make something exponentially better than what we would have made alone. I think that's a critical part of it. We always refer to this, read about this principle years ago called the Mastermind principle, which says that two minds are not doubly better than one, they're exponentially better. And we, based on anecdotal evidence, believe that to be true. It's worked for us over the years. So I think it's another great point is trust and building collaboration with other artists.
Occasionally, really good movies, sometimes even great movies, can be made in a dysfunctional environment. It happens. Even if that's possible, the part where it should be unacceptable is just the toll that it has on your personal life is really important. I mean, again, like Joe was saying, filmmaking is extremely difficult. And you guys know, you need to be at your best. You need to be feeling good. You need to be well supported. You need to feel healthy. It's best to put yourselves in healthy situations where you can trust the people around you, where you are supported, where there is sort of a respect happening between all the collaborators involved necessarily to make a movie. I would say that's the most critical part of it, is just the effect it can have on you on a personal level.
And how would you say kind of, working outside the system and working inside the system, what are the biggest differences in that, in your experience?
Here's the thing. This is kind of strange. I mean, maybe we think of ourselves as like our sort of outsider identity that we sort of feel. I think we feel it even when we're working inside. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but I feel like we approach everything very similarly. Now I should give this sort of framing. Joe and I, again, this might have to do partially with the fact that we work as a team, but we are very good at communicating our vision and talking about what we want to do and why we want to do it and how we're going to do it. And in a way that is very understandable to others, because he and I have to do that with one another all the time. We have to, if one of us has a crazy idea, it's hard for the other one to participate in it and support it and sort of help it evolve without it being communicated very clearly. So because we have that skill, even when we're working inside the system and there's more people kind of watching you and questioning what you're doing, we're very good at saying what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're going to do it. And, and it doesn't bother us to have to do that. We don't resent the fact that somebody needs to know or wants to know, or we have to take a pause from doing the actual work and explain it. We're fine. We don't have egos about that at all. I think we've been able to work inside the system pretty easily because of that ease of communication that we have. And it's also, I think it's coupled with a confidence about what we're trying to do. I'll say this other thing. I think why we work well in the system is because, again, not to credit everything to being a team, but when you work as a team, you have to collaborate. You have to be flexible. You can't be inflexible creatively. And there's going to be some point where you're in a place where you're like, you don't get something, you don't like something, you're not sure about something, but your partner is very keen on realizing some version of it. And you have to figure out, well, how do we both make this work? You know, it's an incredible exercise, compromise and collaboration. And I think a lot of times you'll see siblings doing this or people who are married, you know, need a high level of trust. You need to be able to like submit your ego to somebody else occasionally. And you have to be willing to do that. And there's certain personal relationships that we have in life where you do that regularly in the personal relationship, whether it be a family relationship, a romantic relationship, etc. Our ability to collaborate, our ability to listen to other people, to be respectful of one another in terms of what our ideas are. I mean, that translates to how we treat other people. So when we are working within the system, we listen. We're not dismissive of other people. Everybody, you know, there's 100 names at the end of the movie or 200 names or how many, because they're all involved in making a movie. Everybody's got a voice.
Thousands.
Yeah, thousands of people. Exactly. I think we have a healthy respect for other people and we know how to listen to them and without losing the core of what we're looking for.
I think those are really wise words and really helpful for anyone who's getting into film, because it's so easy to think, oh, the auteur theory, I have to have everything figured out myself. And anyone who questions it, they're fired and off the set, where it's really the opposite. You really want to open up the creative process to your collaborators, hear what they have to say, and kind of meld the minds so that you can actually come up with maybe even a better idea than the two of you had that you wouldn't have had on your own. But because you're working together, you're able to come up with this sort of mastermind.
That's a great point, by the way. And I think it's healthy to, as you said earlier, to demystify filmmaking. There are no true auteurs. They all have collaborators that are critical to their work. And you can go throughout film history and look at all the great auteurs, and there's usually a producer or a writer or an actor or an editor or a composer that is critical to their voice. And at least in the early stages of their career when they were forming their voice. So it's a sort of a media enforced myth that isn't healthy, I think, to young filmmakers. So it's accurate that you point that out.
I actually love the movies that have the button at the very end of the credits, because I'm one of those people who I'm sitting in the movie theater and the movie's not done until the credits are done. And I'm sitting there, people are cleaning up around me, and I'm like, sorry, I'm not going to leave. I'm still watching the credits. But I think it's actually a genius move to put something after the credits because it makes everyone stay and actually appreciate like watching. Like, it took a village. It really does.
The process that we're all describing is, you know, at least for us, that's the heart of how we make films. And we believe that's sort of like not only the most fun way to make movies, but the most successful way to make movies. But that's why it's so critical to have partners in the process that you can trust, to have people involved, collaborators involved who understand that the movie is bigger than any of us. And we're all serving the movie. And there is sort of an order to how that's orchestrated within a film, because you can become lost in opening up your process to people who aren't approaching it generously and with the right attitude. And sometimes that's studio executives who have ideas about what the movie should be that have nothing to do with the movie, might have more to do with the 10 other movies they've suffered through in the last 2 years of their career, whatever it is, or it's some sort of egotistical creative that's involved in the process. It could be anything. That kind of a process can be undone by people and destroyed by people who are not approaching it in the right spirit with the right attitude. You know, there's a reason why people get guarded sometimes, because you are vulnerable. Your vision is vulnerable.
And bringing it back to Pieces, can you think of what your first image of Slamdance was, or how it came to you to even bring the film to Slamdance? I'd love to hear that.
Our first effort to bring the movie to an audience was at this thing called the Independent Feature Film Market in New York City. It was sponsored by the IFP, the Independent Feature Project. And it's more like a market. It's not a film festival. And they would have it at the Angelica Theater. At the time, you know, you were supposed to like try to promote your film to various film interests that were coming to watch it at the film market, some distributors or whoever it may be, publicists, whatever was going on. At the time, the person who is still a partner of Joe and I, Jay Gost, he actually helped us produce Pieces. He was in drama school with Joe at the time. He was working like the midnight shift at a big printing house in Manhattan. So we had access to like all the materials we needed. So we mailed everybody. We plastered Lower Manhattan with placards. We filled the theater. And they tell you at the feature film market, don't worry if people walk out. They're not here to enjoy movies, to have fun. They're going to know within 10 minutes whether your movie is something they might be interested in. And it's typical they walk out. That's what happened while Pieces was playing. Now, Joe wasn't there because he was in Los Angeles and graduate student housing at UCLA. he and his wife were having their first child at the same time. So I was on my own there without him. And then at the end of the theater, everybody streams out of the theater. There was two people that stopped. One was a producer who just said, who I never saw again. And then the second was John Fitzgerald, who is one of the 4 founders of Slamdance. And he said, hey, I'm helping to run this festival called Slamdance, and I think you guys should submit. I really liked your movie, and you should think about submitting it to the festival. Let me know if I can help with that. And so we did. I mean, that was literally the beginning of Slamdance for us, was John Fitzgerald walking out of that screening. Couldn't have been more thrilled to find Slamdance, to be admitted, and to become a part of the Slamdance process and family, because it's clearly so aligned with who we are as people, who we are as filmmakers. We really found our people there.
We like to end the show with a fun lightning round. You guys ready? Buckle up.
Ready, let's do it.
Favorite movie snack?
Popcorn, no question.
Raisinets, I'm embarrassed to say.
The first indie film you remember watching?
Eraserhead.
I don't know. I imagine it was something with Cassavetes, but I can't say exactly.
Favorite guilty pleasure movie?
Flash Gordon.
Name a movie you're embarrassed to say that you've never seen.
I mean, we see a lot of stuff, but I'll admit I have not seen Avatar 2 yet.
Wow, I'm just saying the same. I haven't seen Avatar 2 yet either.
If there is a Steven Seagal bar fight between the Coen brothers or the Farrelly brothers, who wins?
Oh my God. That's a very serious question. You can't just casually answer that.
I think the Farrellys probably pulled some moves from the Stooges, right? That might give them the advantage. Although I hear Ethan is pretty mean in a bar fight.
Yeah, he uses a lot of teeth.
The Coens are a little bit younger than the Farrellys.
The Coens are younger than the Farrellys?
We'll get a fact checker on this later.
The younger one's going to win.
So what's the final answer?
Farrellys.
Name a movie line or quote that you use in your everyday life.
Oh my God. Anything from The Godfather, right?
There's this line in The Godfather. Oh, I know this is lightning. I'm sorry. But it was Bartzini all the time. It's a hard to track plot point about Bartzini in the background. So anytime we have problems with some sort of narrative element and something we're working with, we will throw out it was Bartzini all along.
And last but not least, Joe and Anthony Russo, what is the meaning of life?
Select as many experiences as you can before you die.
Just find your passion.
Today's episode was edited by Daniel Angarita. Music by Kevin MacLeod. Produced by Peter Baxter. QC by Max Brown and Tara Blossom. Special thanks to Paul Rackman and the entire Slamdance team. And be sure and check out the Russo Brothers' new film, The Electric State, streaming on Netflix. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.